The term Peter Pan syndrome first appeared in 1983, introduced by psychologist Dan Kiley in his book The Peter Pan Syndrome: Men Who Have Never Grown Up. It refers to adults who, although they have reached the age of adulthood, continue to behave mentally or emotionally like a child. In other words, they haven't truly grown up. It's important to note, this is not an official mental disorder. It's more accurate to see it as a psychological pattern, a set of behaviors, attitudes, and difficulties, rather than a medical diagnosis. Main characteristics: behaviors. Linked to the syndrome. Someone with Peter Pan tendencies may show some or all of the following: avoidance of responsibility, difficulty or unwillingness to handle the obligations of adult life, work, bills, family, decision-making. Commitment issues, trouble forming long-term relationships. When a relationship requires seriousness, responsibility, or sacrifices, they may withdraw or end it. Focus on freedom and pleasure, living for the moment rather than planning for the future, prioritizing fun and ease. Narcissistic or self-centered traits, wanting to be the center of attention, avoiding criticism, low tolerance for limits or routine. Emotional immaturity, difficulty expressing stable emotions, committing or showing empathy. Kiley also noted that some people with Peter Pan tendencies have complicated relationships with their fathers or with male authority figures in general. There is also its counterpart, the so-called Wendy syndrome, where someone, often a woman, takes on the adult role on behalf of the Peter Pan figure, caring, solving problems, maintaining the household, making decisions, covering their shortcomings. Although it may look functional, this dynamic often brings imbalance, dependence, and emotional exhaustion. Psychological basis: why it happens. There is no single cause. The syndrome often arises from a mixture of psychological, social, and possibly biological factors. Childhood upbringing and parental behavior. A common pattern is overprotective parenting. When a child never learns to face problems, make decisions, fail, and try again, they miss out on developing essential skills for adult life. Traumatic experiences, abandonment, instability, lack of boundaries, can also affect emotional development. From a psychoanalytic perspective, the idea of the eternal child is not new. Carl Jung used the term puer aeternus to describe people who remain emotionally adolescent. Social and cultural environment. Modern life, with its speed, choices, and emphasis on freedom and enjoyment, does not always promote stability or commitment. Society often pushes us to live lightly, to collect experiences, and to avoid routine or long-term obligations. This can encourage Peter Pan-like behavior. In cultures where adulthood no longer comes with immediate independence, delayed transitions like late career stability, late marriage, or postponed family life can become long-term patterns. Psychological defenses: fear, emotional patterns. Fear of failure, criticism, commitment, or responsibility can lead to avoidance, which then becomes a lifestyle. A self-centered emotional stance may also exist, prioritizing pleasure and instant gratification over growth, effort, or long-term goals. When psychological difficulties coexist, anxiety, stress intolerance, depressive traits, or personality disorders, this extended childhood can have a stronger impact. Consequences of the syndrome. It's not just a cute expression. When this pattern is strong and long-lasting, it can cause real-life problems. Relationships, instability, fear of commitment, emotional ups and downs, repeated breakups, loneliness, emotional exhaustion. Work and career, job hopping, procrastination, lack of direction, missed opportunities. Mental health, anxiety, depression, emotional instability, dependence on others, low stress tolerance, especially if there are additional difficulties. Sense of emptiness or insecurity, living in a childlike world without a stable identity or clear goals, feeling fear and uncertainty about the future. Simply put, the child who never grows up is not necessarily carefree. Often they struggle with fear, pressure, and an inability to manage life in the long term. Criticism and limitations of the term. Why it's popular psychology, not science. As mentioned, this is not an official diagnosis. There are no clear, scientifically validated criteria. Much of the description is based on observation and subjective interpretation, not controlled studies. There is a risk of oversimplification. A person who is simply moving at a different pace, delayed job, delayed family decisions, might be unfairly labeled a Peter Pan. Some experts argue the concept originally carried gender bias since it focused primarily on men. In summary, the term is useful as a metaphor to describe recognizable behavior patterns, but it should not be treated as a medical or psychiatric label, when it can become a real problem. Not every youthful, carefree attitude is a sign of trouble, but concerns arise when avoidance of responsibility seriously affects daily life, financially, professionally, or relationally. Significant mental health difficulties coexist: anxiety, depression, dependence, low self-awareness. Immaturity becomes a defense mechanism used to avoid fears, shame, conflict, or insecurity. In such cases, the person may experience social stagnation, remaining stuck without growth, progress, or development. What can help? How someone can work on these tendencies? For someone who recognizes these patterns in themselves, growth is absolutely possible. Psychotherapy or counseling, exploring childhood experiences, fears, insecurities, and emotional defenses. Gradual responsibility building, taking small steps toward independence, stability, and commitment. Emotional awareness, allowing oneself to feel uncomfortable emotions, fear, sadness, anxiety, instead of avoiding them. Revising personal values, understanding that stability, commitment, and consistency aren't burdens, but often keys to security and a meaningful life. Personal choice versus problematic pattern. It is not bad when someone chooses for a period to live lightly, traveling, exploring, avoiding long-term commitments. That can be a conscious lifestyle choice. The issue arises when this stance becomes permanent, passive, defensive. Not a choice, but an avoidance strategy that blocks growth and independence. In other words, youthfulness itself isn't the problem. The inability to grow when life requires it is. Social dimension, a changing era. The term Peter Pan syndrome has become more common in the last decade, and not by accident. Modern society, with its pressure, instability, and obsession with youth and pleasure, creates conditions where such patterns can flourish. When many young people delay career stability, relationships, or parenthood, or choose not to pursue them, it may reflect broader social change, not personal failure. In that sense, Peter Pan syndrome may mirror collective anxieties, uncertainties, and cultural shifts. This makes the concept more relevant than ever. Not just a stereotype, but a reflection of how our society redefines adulthood, responsibility, and emotional growth. In conclusion, Peter Pan syndrome should not be seen as a medical diagnosis, but as a helpful metaphor for understanding behavior patterns that complicate the journey into adulthood. When these behaviors become a persistent lifestyle, avoiding responsibility, fearing commitment, chasing short-term pleasure, people may become trapped in a cycle of immaturity and insecurity. The roots may vary: upbringing, fear, social pressure, personal values. But none of these are destiny. With self-awareness, honesty, and, when needed, professional support, true growth is absolutely possible.